welcome to the Deerfield Public Library Twitch channel. As always, I'm Anne, here today with our continued lunchtime listens, tea and Tolkien edition. I did not bring tea today though, so sorry. So today we are going to continue through the Fellowship of the Ring. Last time, Frodo and Sam and Pippin began a long walk through the Shire as Frodo's kind of goodbye, because he knows he has to leave and he knows the ring is bad, but he wants to say goodbye to the Shire, and they are interrupted by mysterious black riders who seem to be stalking them. The good news is they also get to meet some elves and hang out with them for a while. These are elves who I believe are leaving the shores of Middle-earth. But either way, they spent the night with the elves and fell asleep in a beautiful forest glen, and sang many songs, and that is where we will pick up. So chapter 4, A Shortcut to Mushrooms. In the morning, Frodo woke refreshed. He was lying in a bower made by a living tree with branches laced and drooping to the ground. His bed was of fern and grass, deep and soft and strangely fragrant. The sun was shining through the fluttering leaves, which were still green upon the tree. He jumped up and went out. Sam was sitting on the grass near the edge of the wood. Pippin was standing, studying the sky and weather. There were no sign of the elves. "They have left us fruit and drink and bread," said Pippin. "Come and have your breakfast. The bread tastes almost as good as it did last night. I did not want to leave you any, but Sam insisted." Frodo sat down beside Sam and began to eat. "What's the plan for today?" asked Pippin. "To walk to Bucklebury as quickly as possible," answered Frodo, and gave his attention to the food. "Do you think we shall see anything of those riders?" asked Pippin cheerfully. Under the morning sun, the prospect of seeing a whole troop of them did not seem very alarming to him. "Yes, probably," said Frodo, not liking the reminder. "But I hope to get across the river without their seeing us. Did you find out anything about them from Gilzor?" "Not much. Only hints and riddles," said Frodo evasively. "Did you ask about the sniffing?" "We didn't discuss it," said Frodo with his mouth full. "You should have. I'm sure it is very important." "In that case, I'm sure Gilzor would have refused to explain it," said Frodo sharply. "And now leave me in peace for a bit. I don't want to answer a string of questions while I'm eating. I want to think." "Good heavens," said Pippin, "at breakfast?" He walked away towards the edge of the green. For Frodo's mind, the bright morning, treacherously bright, he thought, had not banished the fear of pursuit, and he pondered the words of Gilzor. The merry voice of Pippin came to him. He was running on the green turf and singing. "No, I could not," he said to himself. "It is one thing to take my young friends walking over the Shire with me until we are hungry and weary, and food and bed are sweet. To take them into exile, where hunger and weariness may have no cure, is quite another, even if they are willing to come. The inheritance is mine alone. I don't think I ought even to take Sam." He looked at Sam Gamgee and discovered that Sam was watching him. "Well, Sam," he said, "what about it? I am leaving the Shire as soon as ever I can. In fact, I have made up my mind now not even to wait a day at Crick Hollow if it can be helped." "Very good, sir." "You still mean to come with me?" "I do." "It is going to be very dangerous, Sam." "It is already dangerous. Most likely neither of us will come back." "If you don't come back, sir, then I shan't, that's certain," said Sam. "Don't you leave him," they said to me. "Leave him," I said. "I never mean to. I am going with him if he climbs to the moon, and if any of those black riders try to stop them, they'll have Sam Gamgee to reckon with," I said. They laughed. "Who are they, and what are you talking about?" "The elves, sir. We had some talk last night, and they seemed to know you were going away, so I didn't see the use of denying it. Wonderful folk, elves, sir, wonderful." "They are," said Frodo. "Do you like them still, now that you have had a closer view?" "They seem a bit above my likes and dislikes, so to speak," answered Sam slowly. It don't seem to matter what I think about them. They are quite different from what I expected. So old and young, and so gay and sad, as it were." Frodo looked at Sam rather startled, half expecting to see some outward sign of the odd change that seemed to have come over him. It did not sound like the voice of the old Sam Gamgee that he thought he knew, but it looked like the old Sam Gamgee sitting there, except that his face was unusually thoughtful. "Do you feel any need to leave the Shire now that your wish to see them has come true already?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I don't know how to say it, but after last night I feel different. I seem to see ahead in a kind of way. I know we are going to take a very long road into darkness, but I know I can't turn back. It isn't to see elves now, nor dragons nor mountains that I want. I don't rightly know what I want. But I have something to do before the end, and it lies ahead, not in the Shire. I must see it through, sir, if you understand me. I do, Sam. It's called foreshadowing. I don't altogether, but I understand that Gandalf chose me a good companion. I am content. We will go together. Frodo finished his breakfast in silence. Then standing up, he looked over the land ahead and called to Pippin. All ready to start, he said as Pippin ran up. We must be getting off at once. We slept late and there are a good many miles to go. You slept late, you mean, said Pippin. I was up long before, and we are only waiting for you to finish eating and thinking. I have finished both now, and I am going to make for Buckleberry Ferry as quickly as possible. I am not going out of the way back to the road we left last night. I'm going to cut straight across country from here. Then you are going to fly, said Pippin. You won't cut straight on foot anywhere in this country. We can cut straighter than the road anyway, answered Frodo. The ferry is east from Woodhall, but the hard road curves away to the left. You can see a bend of it away north over there. It goes around the north end of the marsh so as to strike the causeway from the bridge above Stock, but that is miles out of the way. We could save a quarter of the distance if we made a line for the ferry from where we stand. Short cuts make long delays, argued Pippin. The country is rough round here, and there are bogs and all kinds of difficulties down in the marsh. I know the lands in these parts. And if you're worrying about black riders, I can't see that it is any worse meeting them on a road than in a wood or a field. It is less easy to find people in the woods and fields, answered Frodo. And if you are supposed to be on the road, there is some chance that you will be looked for on the road and not off it. All right, said Pippin. I will follow you into every bog and ditch. But it is hard. I had counted on passing the Golden Perch at Stock before sundown. The best beer in the East Farthing, or used to be. It is a long time since I tasted it. That settles it, said Frodo. Shortcuts make delays, but inns make longer ones. At all costs, we must keep you away from the Golden Perch. We want to get to Buckleberry before dark. What do you say, Sam? I will go along with you, Mr. Frodo, said Sam, in spite of private misgiving and a deep regret for the best beer in the East Farthing. Then, if we are going to toil through bog and briar, let's go now, said Pippin. It was already nearly as hot as it had been the day before, but clouds were beginning to come up from the west. It looked likely to turn to rain. The hobbits scrambled down a steep green bank and plunged into the thick trees below. Their course had been chosen to leave Woodhall to their left and to cut slanting through the woods that clustered along the eastern side of the hills until they reached the flats beyond. Then they could make straight for the ferry over country that was open, except for a few ditches and fences. Frodo reckoned they had 18 miles to go in a straight line. He soon found that the thicket was closer and more tangled than it had appeared. There were no paths in the undergrowth, and they did not get on very fast. When they had struggled to the bottom of the bank, they found a stream running down from the hills behind it in a deeply dug bed with steep, slippery sides overhung with brambles. Most inconveniently, it cut across the line they had chosen. They could not jump over it, nor indeed get across it at all without getting wet, scratched, and muddy. They halted, wondering what to do. First check, said Pippin, smiling grimly. Sam Gamgee looked back. Through an opening in the trees, he caught a glimpse of the top of the green bank from which they had climbed down. Look, he said, clutching Frodo by the arm. They all looked, and on the edge, high above them, they saw against the sky a horse standing. Beside it stooped a black figure. They at once gave up any idea of going back. Frodo led the way and plunged quickly into the thick bushes beside the stream. Whew, he said to Pippin, we were both right. The shortcut has gone crooked already, but we got under cover only just in time. You've got sharp ears, Sam. Can you hear anything coming? They stood still, almost holding their breath as they listened, but there was no sound of pursuit. I don't fancy he would try bringing his horse down that bank, said Sam, but I guess he knows we came down it. We had better be going on. Going on was not altogether easy. They had packs to carry, and the bushes and brambles were reluctant to let them through. They were cut off from the wind by the ridge behind, and the air was still and stuffy. When they forced their way at last into more open ground, they were hot and tired and very scratched, and they were also no longer certain of the direction in which they were going. The banks of the stream sank as it reached the levels and became broader and shallower, wandering off towards the Marish and the river. Why, this is the Stockbrook, said Pippin. If we're going to try and get back on our course, we must cross it once and bear right. They waded the stream and hurried over a wide open space, rush-grown and treeless on the further side. Beyond that, they came again to a belt of trees, tall oaks for the most part, with here and there an elm tree or an ash. The ground was fairly level, and there was little undergrowth, but the trees were too close for them to see far ahead. The leaves blew upwards in sudden gusts of wind, and spots of rain began to fall from the overcast sky. Then the wind died away and the rain came streaming down. They trudged along as fast as they could over patches of grass and through thick drifts of old leaves, and all about them the rain pattered and trickled. They did not talk, but kept glancing back and from side to side. After half an hour, Pippin said, "I hope we have not turned too much towards the south and are not walking longwise through this wood. It is not a very broad belt. I should have said no more than a mile at the widest, and we ought to have been through it by now." "It's no good our starting to go in zigzags," said Frodo. "That won't mend matters. Let us keep on as we are going. I am not sure I want to come out into the open yet." They went on for perhaps another couple miles. Then the sun gleamed out of ragged clouds again and the rain lessened. It was now past midday, and they felt it was high time for lunch. They halted under an elm tree. Its leaves, though fast turning yellow, were still thick, and the ground at its feet was fairly dry and sheltered. When they came to make their meal, they found that the elves had filled their bottles with a clear drink, pale golden in color. It had the scent of a honey made of many flowers, and was wonderfully refreshing. Very soon they were laughing and snapping their fingers at rain and at black riders. The last few miles they felt would soon be behind them. Frodo propped his back against the tree trunk and closed his eyes. Sam and Pippin sat near, and they began to hum and then to sing softly. "Ho, ho, to the bottle I go, to heal my heart and drown my woe. Rain may fall and wind may blow, and there still be many miles to go. But under a tall tree I will lie, and let the sounds go sailing by." Ho, ho, they began again louder, then stopped, short suddenly. Frodo sprang to his feet. A long-drawn wail came down the wind, like the cry of some evil and lonely creature. It rose and fell and ended on a high, piercing note. Even as they sat and stood, as if suddenly frozen, it was answered by another cry, fainter and further off, but no less chilling to the blood. There was then a silence, broken only by the sound of the wind in the leaves. "And what do you think that was?" Pippin asked at last, trying to speak lightly but quavering a little. "If it was a bird, it was one that I never heard in the Shire before." "It was not bird nor beast," said Frodo. "It was a call or a signal. There were words in that cry, though I could not catch them. But no hobbit has such a voice." No more was said about it. They were all thinking of the riders, but no one spoke of them. They were now reluctant either to stay or go on, but sooner or later they had got to get across the open country to the ferry, and it was best to go sooner and in daylight. In a few moments they had shouldered their packs again and were off. Before long the wood came to a sudden end. Wide grasslands stretched before them. They now saw that they had in fact turned too much to the south. Away over the flats they could glimpse the low hill of Buckleberry across the river, but it was now to their left. Creeping cautiously out from the edge of the trees, they set off across the open as quickly as they could. At first they felt afraid, away from the shelter of the wood. Far back behind them stood the high place where they had breakfasted. Frodo half expected to see the small distant figure of a horseman on the ridge, dark against the sky, but there was no sign of one. The sun escaping from the breaking clouds as it sank towards the hills they had left was now shining brightly again. Their fear left them, though they still felt uneasy. But the land became steadily more tame and well-ordered. Soon they came into well-tended fields and meadows. There were hedges and gates and dikes for drainage. Everything seemed quiet and peaceful, just an ordinary corner of the Shire. Their spirits rose with every step. The line of the river grew nearer, and the black riders began to seem like phantoms of the woods now left far behind. They passed along the edge of a huge turnip field and came to a stout gate. Beyond it, a rutted lane ran between low, well-laid hedges towards a distant clump of trees. Pippin stopped. "I know these fields and this gate," he said. "This is Bamfurlong, old Farmer Maggot's land. That's his farm away there in the trees." "One trouble after another," said Frodo, looking nearly as much alarmed as if Pippin had declared the lane was the slot leading to a dragon's den. The others looked at him in surprise. "What's wrong with old Maggot?" said Pippin. "He's a good friend to all the Brandybucks. Of course, he's a terror to trespassers and keeps ferocious dogs. But after all, folks down here are near the border and have to be more on their guard." "I know," said Frodo, "but all the same," he added with a shamefaced laugh, "I'm terrified of him and his dogs. I have avoided his farm for years and years. He caught me several times trespassing after mushrooms when I was a youngster at Brandy Hall. On the last occasion he beat me, and then took me and showed me to his dogs. See, lads, he said, next time this young varmint sets foot on my land, you can eat him. Now see him off. They chased me all the way to the ferry. I never got over the fright, though I dare say the beasts knew their business and would not really have touched me. Pippin laughed. Well, it's time you made it up, especially if you are coming back to live in Buckland. Old Maggot is really a stout fellow, if you leave his mushrooms alone. Let's get into the lane, and then we shan't be trespassing. If we meet him, I'll do the talking. He is a friend of Mary's, and I used to come here with him a good deal at one time. They went along the lane until they saw the thatched roofs of a large house and farm buildings peeping out among the trees ahead. The maggots and the puttyfoots of stock and most of the inhabitants of the marish were house dwellers, and this farm was stoutly built of brick and had a high wall all round it. There was a wide wooden gate opening out of the wall into the lane. Suddenly, as they drew nearer, a terrific baying and barking broke out, and a loud voice was heard shouting, "Grip! Fang! Wolf! Come on, lads!" Frodo and Sam stopped dead, but Pippin walked on a few paces. The gate opened, and 3 huge dogs came pelting out into the lane and dashed towards the travelers, barking fiercely. They took no notice of Pippin, but Sam shrank against the wall while 2 wolfish-looking dogs sniffed at him suspiciously and snarled if he moved. The largest and most ferocious of the 3 halted in front of Frodo, bristling and growling. Through the gate there now appeared a broad, thick-set hobbit with a red round face. Hello, and who may you be, and what may you be wanting?" he asked. "Good afternoon, Mr. Maggot," said Pippin. The farmer looked at him closely. "Well, if it isn't Master Pippin, Mr. Peregrine Took, I should say," he cried, changing from a scowl to a grin. "It's a long time since I saw you round here. It's lucky for you that I know you. I was just going out to set my dogs on any strangers. There are some funny things going on today. Of course, we do get queer folk wandering in these parts at times, too near the river," he said, shaking his head. "But this fellow is the most outlandish I have ever set eyes on. He won't cross my land without leave a second time, not if I can stop it." "What fellow do you mean?" asked Pippin. "Then you haven't seen him?" said the farmer. "He went up the lane towards the causeway not a long while back. He was a funny customer and asking funny questions. But perhaps he'll come along inside and we'll pass the news more comfortable. I've got a drop of good ale on tap if you and your friends are willing, Mr. Took." It seemed plain that the farmer would tell them more if allowed to do it in his own time and fashion, and so they all accepted the invitation. "What about the dogs?" asked Frodo anxiously. The farmer laughed. "They won't harm you, not unless I tell them to. Here, Grip, Fang, heel," he cried. "Heel, Wolf!" To the relief of Frodo and Sam, the dogs walked away and let them go free. Pippin introduced the other 2 to the farmer. "Mr. Frodo Baggins," he said. "You may not remember him, but he used to live at Brandy Hall." At the name Baggins, the farmer started and gave Frodo a sharp glance. For a moment, Frodo thought that the memory of stolen mushrooms had been aroused, and that the dogs would be told to see him off. But Farmer Maggot took him by the arm. "Well, if that isn't queerer than ever," he exclaimed. "Mr. Baggins, is it? Come inside. We must have a talk." They went into the farmer's kitchen and sat by the wide fireplace. Mrs. Maggot brought out beer in a huge jug and filled 4 large mugs. It was a good brew, and Pippin found himself more than compensated for missing the golden perch. Sam sipped his beer suspiciously. He had a natural mistrust of the inhabitants of other parts of the Shire, and also he was not disposed to be quick friends with anyone who had beaten his master, however long ago. After a few remarks about the weather and the agricultural prospects, which were no worse than usual, Farmer Maggot put down his mug and looked at them all in turn. "Now, Mr. Peregrine," he said, "where might you be coming from, and where might you be going to? Were you coming to visit me? For if so, you had gone past my gate without my seeing you." "Well, no," answered Pippin. "To tell you the truth, since you have guessed it, we got into the lane from the other end. We have come over your fields, but that was quite by accident. We lost our way in the woods back near Woodhall trying to take a shortcut to the ferry." "If you were in a hurry, the road would have served you better," said the farmer, "but I wasn't worrying about that. You have leave to walk over my land if you have a mind, Mr. Peregrine, and you, Mr. Baggins, though I dare say you still like mushrooms." He laughed. "Ah, yes, I recognized the name. I recollect the time when young Frodo Baggins was one of the worst young rascals of Buckland, but it wasn't mushrooms I was thinking of. I had just heard the name Baggins before you turned up. What do you think that funny customer asked me?" They waited anxiously for him to go on. "Well," the farmer continued, approaching his point with slow relish, "he came riding on a big black horse in at the gate, which happened to be open, and right up to my door. All black he was himself, too, and cloaked and hooded up as if he did not want to be known. Now, what in the Shire can he want, I thought to myself. We don't see many of the big folk over the border, and anyway, I've never heard of any like this black fellow. Good day to you, I says, going out to him. This lane don't lead anywhere, and wherever you may be going, your quickest way will be back to the road. I didn't like the looks of him, and when Grip came out, he took one sniff and let out a yelp as if he had been stung. He put down his tail and bolted off howling. The black fellow sat quite still. I come from yonder, he said, slow and stiff-like, pointing back west, over my fields, if you please. Have you seen Baggins? He asked in a queer voice and bent down towards me. I could not see any face, for his hood fell so low, and I felt a sort of shiver down my back. But I did not see why he should come riding over my land so bold. Be off, I said. There are no Bagginses here. You're in the wrong part of the Shire. You had better go back west to Hobbiton, but you can go by the road this time. Baggins has left, he answered in a whisper. He is coming. He is not far away. I wish to find him. If he passes, will you tell me? I will come back with gold. No, you won't, I said. You'll go back where you belong, double quick. I give you 1 minute before I call all my dogs. He gave a sort of hiss. It might have been laughing, and it might not. Then he spurred his great horse right at me, and I jumped out of the way only just in time. I called the dogs, but he swung off and rode through the gate and up the lane towards the causeway like a bolt of thunder. What do you think of that? Frodo sat for a moment looking at the fire, but his only thought was how on earth would they reach the ferry? I don't know what to think, he said at last. Then I'll tell you what to think, said Maggot. You should never have gone mixing yourself up with Hobbiton folk, Mr. Frodo. Folk are queer up there. Sam stirred in his chair and looked at the farmer with an unfriendly eye. But you were always a reckless lad. When I heard you'd left the Brandybucks and gone off to that old Mr. Bilbo, I said that you were going to find trouble. Mark my words, this all comes of those strange doings of Mr. Bilbo's. His money was got in some strange fashion in foreign parts, they say. Maybe there is some that want to know what has become of the gold and jewels that he buried in the hill of Hobbiton, as I hear. Frodo said nothing. The shrewd guesses of the farmer were rather disconcerting. Well, Mr. Frodo, Maggot went on, I'm glad that you've had the sense to come back to Buckland. My advice is stay there, and don't get mixed up with these outlandish folk. You'll have friends in these parts. If any of these black fellows come after you again, I'll deal with them. I'll say you're dead, or have left the Shire, or anything you like. And that might be true enough, for as like as not, it is old Mr. Bilbo they want news of. Maybe you're right, said Frodo, avoiding the farmer's eye and staring at the fire. Maggot looked at him thoughtfully. Well, I see you have ideas of your own, he said. It is as plain as my nose that no accident brought you and that rider here on the same afternoon, and maybe my news was no great news to you, after all. I am not asking you to tell me anything you have a mind to keep to yourself, but I see you are in some kind of trouble. Perhaps you are thinking it won't be too easy to get to the ferry without being caught? I was thinking so, said Frodo, but we've got to try and get there, and it won't be done by sitting and thinking. So I'm afraid we must be going. Thank you very much indeed for your kindness. I have been in terror of you and your dogs for over 30 years, Farmer Maggot, though you may laugh to hear it. It's a pity, for I've missed a good friend. And now I'm sorry to leave so soon, but I'll come back perhaps one day, if I get a chance. You'll be welcome when you come, said Maggot, but now I've a notion. It's nearly sundown already, and we are going to have our supper, for we mostly go to bed soon after the sun. If you and Mr. Peregrine and all could stay and have a bite with us, we would be pleased. And so should we, said Frodo, but we must be going at once, I'm afraid. Even now it will be dark before we can reach the ferry. Ah, but wait a minute. I was going to say, after a bit of supper, I'll get out a small wagon and I'll drive you all to the ferry. That will save you a good step and might also save you trouble of another sort. Frodo now accepted the invitation gratefully, to the relief of Pippin and Sam. The sun was already behind the western hills and the light was failing. 2 of Maggot's sons and 3 of his daughters came in, and a generous supper was laid on the large table. The kitchen was lit with candles, and the fire was mended. Mrs. Maggot bustled in and out. 1 or 2 other hobbits belonging to the farm household came in. In a short while, 14 sat down to eat. There was beer in plenty, and a mighty dish of mushrooms and bacon, besides much other solid farmhouse fare. The dogs lay by the fire and gnawed rinds and cracked bones. When they had finished, the farmer and his sons went out with a lantern and got the wagon ready. It was dark in the yard when the guests came out. They threw their packs on board and climbed in. The farmer sat in the driving seat and whipped up his 2 stout ponies. His wife stood in the light of the open door. "You be careful of yourself, Maggot," she called. "Don't go arguing with any foreigners and come straight back." "I will," said he, and drove out of the gate. There was now no breath of wind stirring. The night was still and quiet, and a chill was in the air. They went without lights and took it slowly. After a mile or two, the lane came to an end, crossing a deep dike and climbing a short slope up onto the high-banked causeway. Maggot got down and took a good look either way, north and south, but nothing could be seen in the darkness, and there was not a sound in the still air. Thin strands of river mist were hanging above the dikes and crawling over the fields. "It's going to be thick," said Maggot, "but I'll not light my lantern till I turn for home. We'll hear anything on the road long before we meet it tonight." It was 5 miles or more from Maggot's Lane to the ferry. The hobbits wrapped themselves up, but their ears were straining for any sound above the creak of the wheels and the slow clop of the pony's hooves. The wagon seemed slower than a snail to Frodo. Beside him, Pippin was nodding towards sleep, but Sam was staring forwards into the rising fog. They reached the entrance to the ferry lane at last. It was marked by 2 tall white posts that suddenly loomed up on their right. Farmer Maggot drew in his ponies, and the wagon creaked to a halt. They were just beginning to scramble out when suddenly they heard what they had all been dreading: hoofs on the road ahead. The sound was coming towards them. Maggot jumped down and stood holding the ponies' heads and peering forward into the gloom. Clip, clop came the approaching rider. The fall of the hoofs sounded loud in the still, foggy air. "You'd better be hidden, Mr. Frodo," said Sam anxiously. "You get down in the wagon and cover up with blankets, and we'll send this rider to the right-abouts." He climbed out and went to the farmer's side. Black riders would have to ride over him to get near the wagon. Clip, clop. The rider was nearly on them. "Hello there," called Farmer Maggot. The advancing hoofs stopped short. They thought they could dimly guess a dark cloaked shape in the mist, a yard or two ahead. "Now then," said the farmer, throwing the reins to Sam and striding forward, "don't you come a step nearer. What do you want and where are you going?" "I want Mr. Baggins. Have you seen him?" said a muffled voice. But the voice was the voice of Mary Brandybuck. A dark lantern was uncovered, and its light fell on the astonished face of the farmer. "Mr. Mary!" he cried. "Yes, of course. Who did you think it was?" said Mary, coming forward. As he came out of the mist and their fear subsided, he seemed suddenly to diminish to ordinary hobbit size. He was riding a pony, and the scarf was swathed round his neck and over his chin to keep out the fog. Frodo sprang out of the wagon to greet him. "So there you are at last," said Mary. "I was beginning to wonder if you would turn up at all today, and I was just going back to supper. When it grew foggy, I came across and rode up towards Stock to see if you had fallen in any ditches. But I'm blessed if I know which way you have come. Where did you find them, Mr. Maggot? In your duck pond?" "No, I caught him trespassing," said the farmer, "and nearly set my dogs on him, but they'll tell you all the story, I've no doubt. Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Mary, Mr. Frodo, and all, I'd best be turning for home. Mrs. Maggot will be worrying with the night getting so thick." He backed the wagon into the lane and turned it. "Well, good night to you all," he said. "It's been a queer day and no mistake, but all's well as ends well, though perhaps we should not say that until we reach our own doors. I'll not deny that I'll be glad now when I do." He lit his lanterns and got up. Suddenly, he produced a large basket from under the seat. "I was nearly forgetting," he said. "Mrs. Maggot put this up for Mr. Baggins, with her compliments." He handed it down and moved off, followed by a chorus of thanks and good nights. They watched the pale rings of light round his lanterns as they dwindled into the foggy night. Suddenly, Frodo laughed. From the covered basket he held, the scent of mushrooms was rising. Chapter 5. A Conspiracy Unmasked. "Now, we had better get home ourselves," said Mary. "There's something funny about all this, I see, but it must wait until we get in." They turned down the ferry lane, which was straight and well kept and edged with large whitewashed stones. In 100 yards or so, it brought them to the riverbank, where there was a broad wooden landing stage. A large, flat ferry boat was moored beside it. The white bollards near the water's edge glimmered in the light of 2 lamps on high posts. Behind them, the mists in the flat fields were now above the hedges, but the water before them was dark, with only a few curling wisps like steam among the reeds by the bank. There seemed to be less fog on the further side. Mary led the pony over a gangway onto the ferry, and the others followed. Mary then pushed slowly off with a long pole. The Brandywine flowed slow and broad before them. On the other side, the bank was steep, and up it a winding path climbed from the further landing. Lamps were twinkling there. Behind loomed up the Buck Hill, and out of it, through stray shrouds of mist, shone many round windows, yellow and red. They were the windows of Brandy Hall, the ancient home of the Brandybucks. Long ago, Gorhindad Oldbuck, head of the Oldbuck family, one of the oldest in the Marish, or indeed in the Shire, had crossed the river, which was the original boundary of the lands eastward. He built and excavated Brandy Hall, changed his name to Brandybuck, and settled down to become master of what was virtually a small independent country. His family grew, and after his days continued to grow, until Brandy Hall occupied the whole of the low hill and had 3 large front doors, many side doors, and about 100 windows. The Brandybucks and their numerous dependents then began to burrow and later to build all round about. That was the origin of Buckland, a thickly inhabited strip between the river and the Old Forest, a sort of colony from the Shire. Its chief village was Bucklebury, clustering in the banks and slopes behind Brandy Hall. The people in the Marish were friendly with the Bucklanders, and the authority of the master of the hall, as the head of the Brandybuck family was called, was still acknowledged by the farmers between Stock and Rushy. But most of the folk of the Old Shire regarded the Bucklanders as peculiar, half foreigners as it were. Though, as a matter of fact, they were not very different from other hobbits of the Four Farthings, except in one point. They were fond of boats, and some of them could swim. Their land was originally unprotected from the east, but on that side they had built a hedge, the High Hay. It had been planted many generations ago, and was now thick and tall, for it was constantly tended. It ran all the way from Brandywine Bridge in a big loop curving away from the river to Haysend, where the Withwindle flowed out of the forest into the Brandywine, well over 20 miles from end to end. But of course, it was not a complete protection. The forest drew close to the hedge in many places. The Bucklanders kept their doors locked after dark, and that also was not usual in the Shire. The ferry boat moved slowly across the water. The Buckland shore drew nearer. Sam was the only member of the party who had not been over the river before. He had a strange feeling as the slow gurgling stream slipped by. His old life lay behind in the mists. Dark adventure lay in front. He scratched his head, and for a moment he had a passing wish that Mr. Frodo could have gone on living quietly at Bag End. The 4 hobbits stepped off the ferry. Merry was tying it up, and Pippin was already leading the pony up the path when Sam, who had been looking back as if to take farewell of the Shire, said in a hoarse whisper, "Look back, Mr. Frodo. Do you see anything?" On the far stage, under the distant lamps, they could just make out a figure. It looked like a dark black bundle left behind, but as they looked it seemed to move and sway this way and that, as if searching the ground. It then crawled or went crouching back into the gloom beyond the lamps. "What in the Shire is that?" exclaimed Merry. "Something that is following us," said Frodo, "but don't ask any more now. Let's get away at once." They hurried up the path to the top of the bank, but when they looked back, the far shore was shrouded in mist, and nothing could be seen. "Thank goodness you don't keep any boats on the west bank," said Frodo. "Can horses cross the river?" "They can go 20 miles north to Brandywine Bridge, or they might swim," answered Merry, "though I never heard of any horse swimming the Brandywine. But what have horses got to do with it? I'll tell you later. Let's get indoors and then we can talk." "All right. You and Pippin know your way, so I'll just ride on and tell Fatty Bulger that you're coming. We'll see about supper and things." "We had our supper early with Farmer Maggot," said Frodo, "but we could do with another." "You shall have it. Give me that basket," said Merry, and rode ahead into the darkness. It was some distance from the Brandywine to Frodo's new house at Crick Hollow. They passed Buck Hill and Brandy Hall on their left, and on the outskirts of Bucklebury struck the main road of Buckland that ran south from the bridge. Half a mile northward along this, they came to a lane opening on their right. This they followed for a couple of miles as it climbed up and down into the country. At last they came to a narrow gate in a thick hedge. Nothing could be seen of the house in the dark. It stood back from the lane in the middle of a wide circle of lawn surrounded by a belt of low trees inside the outer hedge. Frodo had chosen it because it stood in an out-of-the-way corner of the country and there were no other dwellings close by. You could get in and out without being noticed. It had been built a long while before by the Brandybucks for the use of guests or members of the family that wished to escape from the crowded life of Brandy Hall for a time. It was an old-fashioned, countrified house, as much like a hobbit hole as possible. It was long and low with no upper story, and it had a roof of turf, round windows, and a large round door. As they walked up the green path from the gate, no light was visible. The windows were dark and shuttered. Frodo knocked on the door, and Fatty Bulger opened it. A friendly light streamed out. They slipped in quickly and shut themselves in the light inside. They were in a wide hall with doors on either side. In front of them, a passage ran back down the middle of the house. "Well, what do you think of it?" asked Mary, coming up the passage. "We have done our best in a short time to make it look like home. After all, Fatty and I only got here with the last cartload yesterday." Frodo looked round. It did indeed look like home. Many of his own favorite things, or Bilbo's things, they reminded him sharply of him in their new setting, were arranged as nearly as possible as they had been in Bag End. It was a pleasant, comfortable, welcoming place, and he found himself wishing that he was really coming here to settle down in quiet retirement. It seemed unfair to have put his friends to all this trouble, and he wondered again how he was going to break the news to them that he must leave them so soon, indeed at once. Yet that would have to be done that very night, before they all went to bed. "It's delightful," he said with an effort. "I hardly feel I have moved at all." The travelers hung up their cloaks and piled their packs on the floor. Mary led them down the passage and threw open a door at the far end. Firelight came out and a puff of steam. "A bath!" cried Pippin. "Oh, blessed Meriadoc!" "Which order shall we go in?" said Frodo. "Eldest first or quickest first?" "You'll be last either way, Master Peregrine." "Trust me to arrange things better than that," said Mary. "We can't begin life at Crick Hollow with a quarrel over baths. In that room there are 3 tubs and a copper full of boiling water. There are also towels, mats, and soap. Get inside and be quick." Mary and Fatty went into the kitchen at the other end of the passage and busied themselves with the final preparations for a late supper. Snatches of competing songs came from the bathroom, mixed with the sound of splashing and wallowing. The voice of Peregrine was suddenly lifted up above the others in one of Bilbo's favorite bath songs. "Sing hey for the bath at the close of day that washes the weary mud away. A loon is he that will not sing. Oh, water hot is a noble thing. Oh, sweet is the sound of the falling rain in the brook that leaps from hill to plain. Better than rain or rippling streams is water hot that smoke and steams. Oh, water core we may pour at need, down a thirsty throat and be glad indeed. But better is beer if drink we lack, and water hot poured down the back. Oh, water fair that leaps on high, in a fountain white beneath the sky. But never did fountain sound so sweet as splashing hot water with my feet." There was a terrific splash and a shout of "Whoa!" from Frodo. It appeared that a lot of Pippin's bath had imitated a fountain and leapt on high. Mary went to the door. "What about supper and beer in the throat?" he called. Frodo came out, drying his hair. "There's so much water in the air that I'm coming into the kitchen to finish," he said. "Looks," said Mary, looking in. The stone floor was swimming. "You ought to mop all that up before you get anything to eat, Peregrine," he said. "Hurry up or we shan't wait for you." They had supper in the kitchen on a table near the fire. "I suppose you 3 won't want mushrooms again," said Fredegar without much hope. "Yes, we shall," cried Pippin. "They're mine," said Frodo. "Given to me by Mrs. Maggot, a queen among farmers' wives. Take your greedy hands away and I'll serve them." Hobbits have a passion for mushrooms, surpassing even the greediest likings of big people, a fact which partly explains young Frodo's long expeditions to the renowned fields of the Marish and the wrath of the injured Maggot. On this occasion there was plenty for all, even according to Hobbit standards. There were also many other things to follow, and when they had finished, even Fatty Bulger heaved a sigh of content. They pushed back the table and drew chairs round the fire. "We'll clear up later," said Mary. "Now tell me all about it. I guess that you have been having adventures, which is not quite fair without me. I want a full account, and most of all I want to know what was the matter with old Maggot and why he spoke to me like that. He sounded almost as if he was scared, if that is possible." "We have all been scared," said Pippin after a pause, in which Frodo stared at the fire and did not speak. "You would have been too if you'd been chased for 2 days by black riders." "And what are they?" "Black figures riding on black horses," answered Pippin. "If Frodo won't talk, I will tell you the whole tale from the beginning." He then gave a full account of their journey from the time when they left Hobbiton. Sam gave various supporting nods and exclamations. Frodo remained silent. "I should think you were making it all up," said Mary, "if I had not seen that black shape on the landing stage and heard the queer sound of Maggot's voice. What do you make of it all, Frodo?" "Cousin Frodo has been very close," said Pippin, "but the time has come for him to open out. So far we have been given nothing more to go on than Farmer Maggot's guess that it has something to do with old Bilbo's treasure." "That was only a guess," said Frodo hastily. "Maggot does not know anything." "Old Maggot is a shrewd fellow," said Mary. "A lot goes on behind his round face that does not come out in his talk. I have heard that he used to go into the old forest at one time, and he has the reputation of knowing a good many strange things. but you can at least tell us, Frodo, whether you think his guess good or bad." "I think," answered Frodo slowly, "that it was a good guess as far as it goes. There is a connection with Bilbo's old adventures, and the riders are looking, or perhaps one ought to say searching, for him or for me. I also fear, if you want to know, that it is no joke at all, and that I am not safe here or anywhere else." He looked round at the windows and walls, as if he was afraid they would suddenly give way. The others looked at him in silence and exchanged meaningful glances among themselves. "It's coming out in a minute," whispered Pippin to Merry. Merry nodded. "Well," said Frodo at last, sitting up and straightening his back as if he had made a decision, "I can't keep it dark any longer. I've got something to tell you all, but I don't quite know how to begin." "I think I could help you," said Merry quietly, "by telling you some of it myself." "What do you mean?" said Frodo, looking at him anxiously. "Just this, my dear old Frodo. You are miserable because you don't know how to say goodbye. You mean to leave the Shire, of course, but danger has come on you sooner than you expected, and now you're making up your mind to go at once, and you don't want to. We're very sorry for you." Frodo opened his mouth and shut it again. His look of surprise was so comical that they laughed. "Dear old Frodo," said Pippin, "did you really think you had thrown dust in all our eyes? You have not been nearly careful or clever enough for that. You've obviously been planning to go and saying farewell to all your haunts all this year since April. We have constantly heard you muttering, 'Shall I ever look down into that valley again, I wonder,' and things like that, and pretending that you had come to the end of your money and actually selling your beloved bag and to those Sackville Bagginses, and all those close talks with Gandalf." "Good heavens," said Frodo, "I thought I had been both careful and clever. I don't know what Gandalf will say. Is all the Shire discussing my departure then?" "Oh no," said Merry. "Don't worry about that. The secret won't keep for long, of course, but at present it is, I think, only known to us conspirators. After all, you must remember that we know you well, and are often with you. We can usually guess what you're thinking. I knew Bilbo, too. To tell you the truth, I had been watching you rather closely ever since he left. I thought you would go after him sooner or later. Indeed, I expected you to go sooner, and lately we have been very anxious. We have been terrified that you might give us the slip and go off suddenly, all on your own like he did. Ever since this spring, we have kept our eyes open and done a good deal of planning on our own account. You are not going to escape so easily." "But I must go," said Frodo. "It cannot be helped, dear friends. It is wretched for us all, but it is no use your trying to keep me. Since you have guessed so much, please help me and do not hinder me." "You do not understand," said Pippin. "You must go, and therefore we must too. Merry and I are coming with you. Sam is an excellent fellow and would jump down a dragon's throat to save you if he did not trip over his own feet, but you will need more than one companion in your dangerous adventure." "My dear and most beloved hobbits," said Frodo, deeply moved. "But I could not allow it. I decided that long ago, too. You speak of danger, but you do not understand. This is no treasure hunt, no there and back again journey. I am flying from deadly peril into deadly peril." "Of course we understand," said Merry firmly. "That is why we have decided to come. We know the ring is no laughing matter, but we are going to do our best to help you against the enemy." "The ring?" said Frodo, now completely amazed. "Yes, the ring," said Merry. "My dear old hobbit, you don't allow for the inquisitiveness of friends. I have known about the existence of the ring for years, before Bilbo went away, in fact. But since he obviously regarded it as a secret, I kept the knowledge in my head until we had formed our conspiracy. I did not know Bilbo, of course, as well as I know you. I was too young, and he was also more careful, but he was not careful enough. If you want to know how I first found out, I will tell you." "Go on," said Frodo, faintly. "It was the Sackville Bagginses that were his downfall, as you might expect. One day, a year before the party, I happened to be walking along the road when I saw Bilbo ahead. Suddenly in the distance, the SBs appeared, coming towards us. Bilbo slowed down, and then, hey presto, he vanished. I was so startled that I hardly had the wits to hide myself in a more ordinary fashion, but I got through the hedge and walked along the field inside. I was peeping through the road after the SBs had passed and was looking straight at Bilbo when he suddenly reappeared. I caught a glint of gold as he put something back in his trouser pocket. After that, I kept my eyes open. In fact, I confess that I spied. But you must admit that it was very intriguing, and I was only in my teens. I must be the only one in the Shire besides you, Frodo, that has ever seen the old fellow's secret book." "You've read his book?" cried Frodo. "Good heavens above, is nothing safe?" "Not too safe, I should say," said Merry. "But I have only had one rapid glance, and that was difficult to get. He never left the book about. I wonder what became of it. I should like another look. Have you got it, Frodo? No, it was not at Bag End. He must have taken it away. Well, as I was saying, Merry proceeded, I kept my knowledge to myself till this spring when things got serious. Then we formed our conspiracy, and as we were serious too and meant business, we have not been too scrupulous. You are not a very easy nut to crack, and Gandalf is worse. But if you wanted to be introduced to our chief investigator, I can produce him. Where is he? Said Frodo, looking round as if he expected a masked and sinister figure to come out of a cupboard. Step forward, Sam, said Merry, and Sam stood up with a face scarlet up to the ears. Here is our collector of information, and he has collected a lot, I can tell you, before he was finally caught. After which I may say he seemed to regard himself as on parole and dried up. Sam, cried Frodo, feeling that amazement could go no further, and quite unable to decide whether he felt angry, amused, relieved, or merely foolish. Yes, sir, said Sam, begging your pardon, sir, but I meant no wrong to you, Mr. Frodo, nor to Mr. Gandalf for that matter. He has some sense, mind you, and when he said go alone, and when you said go alone, he said no, take someone as you can trust. But it does not seem I can trust anyone, said Frodo. Sam looked at him unhappily. It all depends on what you want, put in Merry. You can trust us to stick with you through thick and thin, to the bitter end, and you can trust us to keep any secret of yours, closer than you keep it yourself. But you cannot trust us to let you face trouble alone and go off without a word. We're your friends, Frodo. Anyway, there it is. We know most of what Gandalf has told you. We know a good deal about the ring. We're horribly afraid, but we are coming with you, or following you like hounds. And after all, sir, added Sam, you did ought to take the elves' advice. Gilder said you should take them as was willing, and you can't deny it. I don't deny it, said Frodo, looking at Sam, who was now grinning. I don't deny it, but I will never believe that you are sleeping again, whether you snore or not. I shall kick you hard to make sure. You are a set of deceitful scoundrels, he said, turning to the others. But bless you, he laughed, getting up and waving his arms. I give in. I will take Gildor's advice. If the danger were not so dark, I should dance for joy. Even so, I cannot help feeling happy, happier than I have felt for a long time. I had dreaded this evening. Good, that's settled. 3 cheers for Captain Frodo and company, they shouted, and they danced round him. Merry and Pippin began a song which they had apparently got ready for the occasion. It was made on the model of the dwarf song that started Bilbo on his adventure long ago and went to the same tune. Farewell we call to hearth and tall, the wind may blow and rain may fall. We must away ere break of day, far over wood and mountain tall. To Rivendell, where elves yet dwell, in glades beneath the misty fell. Through moor and waste we ride in haste, and whither then we cannot tell. With foes ahead, behind us dread, beneath the sky shall be our bed, until at last our toil be past, our journey done, our errand sped. We must away, we ride before the break of day. Very good, said Frodo, but in that case there are a lot of things to do before we go to bed, under a roof for tonight at any rate. Oh, that was poetry, said Pippin. Do you really mean to start before the break of day? I don't know, answered Frodo. I fear those Black Riders, and I am sure it is unsafe to stay in one place long, especially in a place to which it is known I was going. Also, Gildor advised me not to wait, but I should very much like to see Gandalf. I could see that even Gildor was disturbed when he heard that Gandalf had never appeared. It really depends on 2 things. How soon could the riders get to Bucklebury, and how soon could we get off? It will take a great deal of preparation. The answer to the second question, said Merry, is that we could get off in an hour. I have prepared practically everything. There are 6 ponies in a stable across the fields. Stores and tackles are all packed, except for a few extra clothes and the perishable food. This seems to have been a very efficient conspiracy, said Frodo. But what about the Black Riders? Would it be safe to wait 1 day for Gandalf? That all depends on what you think the riders would do if they found you here, answered Merry. They could have reached here by now, of course, if they were not stopped at the north gate, where the hedge runs down to the riverbank just this side of the bridge. The gate guards would not let them through by night, though they might break through. Even in the daylight, they would try to keep them out, I think, at any rate until they got a message through to the master of the hall, for they would not like the look of the riders and would certainly be frightened by them. But of course, Buckland cannot resist a determined attack for long. And it is possible that in the morning, even a black rider that rode up and asked for Mr. Baggins would be let through. It is pretty generally known that you are coming back to live at Kirkhollow. Frodo sat for a while and thought. I have made up my mind, he said finally. I am starting tomorrow as soon as it is light, but I am not going by road. It would be safer to wait here than that. If I go through the north gate, my departure from Buckland will be known at once, instead of being secret for several days at least, as it might be. And what is more, the bridge in the east road near the borders will certainly be watched, whether any rider gets into Buckland or not. We don't know how many there are, but there are at least 2, and possibly more. The only thing to do is to go off in quite an unexpected direction. But that can only mean going through the Old Forest, said Fredegar, horrified. You can't be thinking of doing that. It's quite as dangerous as black riders. Not quite, said Merry. It sounds very desperate, but I believe Frodo is right. It is the only way of getting off without being followed at once. With luck, we might get a considerable start. But you won't have any luck in the Old Forest, objected Fredegar. No one ever has luck in there. You'll get lost. People don't go in there. Oh, yes, they do, said Merry. The Brandybucks go in, occasionally when the fit takes them. We have a private entrance. Frodo went in once long ago. I have been in several times, usually in daylight, of course, when the trees are sleepy and fairly quiet. Well, do as you think best, said Fredegar. I am more afraid of the Old Forest than of anything I know about. The stories about it are a nightmare. But my vote hardly counts, as I am not going on the journey. Still, I am very glad someone is stopping behind who can tell Gandalf what you have done when he turns up, as I'm sure he will before long. Fond as he was of Frodo, Fatty Bolger had no desire to leave the Shire, nor to see what lay outside it. His family came from the East Farthing, from Budgeford and Bridgefields, in fact, but he had never been over the Brandywine Bridge. His task, according to the original plans of the conspirators, was to stay behind and deal with inquisitive folk, and to keep up as long as possible the pretense that Mr. Baggins was still living at Kirkhollow. He had even brought along some old clothes of Frodo's to help him in playing the part. They little thought how dangerous that part may prove. Excellent, said Frodo when he understood the plan. We could not have left any message behind for Gandalf otherwise. I don't know whether these riders can read or not, of course, but I should not have dared to risk a written message in case they got in and searched the house. But if Fatty is willing to hold the fort, and I can be sure of Gandalf knowing the way we have gone, that decides me. I am going into the Old Forest, first thing tomorrow. Well, that's that, said Pippin. On the whole, I would rather have our job than Fatty's, waiting here till black riders come. You wait till you're well inside the forest, said Fredegar. You'll wish you were back here with me before this time tomorrow. It's no good arguing about it anymore, said Merry. We have still got to tidy up and put the finishing touches to the packing before we go to bed. I shall call you all before the break of day. When at last he had got to bed, Frodo could not sleep for some time. His legs ached. He was glad that he was riding in the morning. Eventually he fell into a vague dream in which he seemed to be looking out of a high window over a dark sea of tangled trees. Down below among the roots there was the sound of creatures crawling and snuffling. He felt sure they would smell him out sooner or later. Then he heard a noise in the distance. At first he thought it was a great wind coming over the leaves of the forest. Then he knew that it was not leaves, but the sound of the sea far off, a sound he had never heard in waking life, though it had often troubled his dreams. Suddenly he found he was out in the open. There were no trees at all. He was on a dark heath, and there was a strange salt smell in the air. Looking up, he saw before him a tall white tower standing alone on a high ridge. A great desire came over him to climb the tower and see the sea. He started to struggle up the ridge towards the thunder, but suddenly a light came in the sky, and there was a noise of thunder. That is where we will end for today. And join me next week at 1:30 p.m. Central for Chapter 6, The Old Forest. Have a great rest of your day. Bye!